The courtroom wasn't just filled with people, it was charged with an energy that felt like the air itself could split open. Every seat was taken, cameras clicked from the gallery, and the buzz of anticipation grew louder with every second. Donald Trump sat at the defense table, shifting slightly in his chair, lips pressed thin, eyes darting toward the press. He had been in plenty of rooms where the spotlight was harsh, but this one was different. Across from him, calm, composed, and razor-sharp, sat Denzel Washington. He wasn't here as an actor, not in this moment. He was here as a citizen, as a man carrying the weight of truth, and the silence around him spoke louder than Trump's restless tapping fingers. The judge entered, and the crowd hushed instantly. But even then, the tension didn't fade, it grew heavier. Everyone knew why they were here. Everyone knew what was about to unfold wasn't just a hearing, it was a collision of two forces, one desperately clinging to power, the other wielding truth like a blade. Trump leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something quickly, but his eyes never left Denzel. Denzel didn't flinch. He adjusted his tie, sat straighter, and let the moment breathe. He wasn't here to play for applause. He was here to speak words that would pierce through spin, deflection, and noise. Words that would make the courtroom tremble. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final, echoing through the chamber like a warning shot. "Proceed," the judge said, voice steady, though even he seemed to sense the storm brewing beneath the surface. Trump's lawyer rose quickly, papers in hand, voice booming as if volume could mask insecurity. He painted Trump as a misunderstood leader, attacked by enemies who feared his strength. His words filled the room, but they lacked weight. They scattered into the air like smoke, leaving behind nothing solid to hold on to. Denzel listened quietly, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't shift, didn't frown, didn't even blink more than necessary. He waited. That patience, that refusal to be rattled, was its own kind of pressure. When the lawyer finally sat down, a sigh of relief slipped from Trump's lips. For a second, it looked like he believed the moment had been contained. Then Denzel rose. The scrape of his chair against the polished floor was louder than the lawyer's entire argument. Heads turned, spines straightened, and the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Denzel's steps toward the podium were deliberate, calm, but carried a gravity that no one could deny. He placed his hands on the wood, leaned forward slightly, and spoke in a voice so controlled, so measured, it cut through the silence like a knife. "This isn't about politics," he began, eyes steady on Trump. "This is about accountability. And no one, no matter how powerful, stands above that." The courtroom shifted. Journalists leaned forward. The air thickened. Trump's jaw clenched, but Denzel didn't pause. He pressed forward, and every word carried the weight of a hammer striking steel. The silence after Denzel's opening words stretched like a taut wire across the courtroom. Everyone knew he had just shifted the ground beneath their feet, but no one dared breathe too loudly. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His calm carried the kind of weight that forced attention. "When leaders use fear as their weapon," he continued, his gaze locked directly on Trump, "they create chaos, not order. They divide families, communities, an entire nation. And when those divisions erupt into violence, those same leaders pretend it was never their fault." The words landed like heavy stones, one after another, building a wall of undeniable truth. Trump shifted, his shoulders tightening, eyes narrowing as though he could stare Denzel into silence. But the room was no longer his. Denzel wasn't acting, wasn't performing. He was holding the mirror up for everyone to see. "People died," Denzel said simply, the phrase slicing through the space like a blade. Not because of chance, not because of confusion, but because reckless words became fuel. Words you spoke. Words you repeated, knowing exactly how they would be taken. The gallery stirred, a ripple of murmurs spreading before the judge's gavel cracked down again. Trump's lawyer jumped up, objecting, his voice louder than sense, claiming Denzel was grandstanding. But even the objection sounded hollow. The judge, after a pause, motioned for Denzel to continue. That small gesture was a victory in itself. Denzel nodded, barely, before turning back to Trump. His voice softened, but the sharpness only deepened. "History won't care about excuses," he said. "It will remember what was done, and what was allowed." The room trembled again, this time not from noise, but from truth pressing against denial. Trump's face flushed, a deep red that betrayed more than anger, it revealed fear. For years, he had relied on deflection, jokes, or sheer volume to overwhelm opponents. But this time, none of that worked. Denzel stood steady, a wall of calm resolve, and the contrast made Trump's bluster look small, even desperate. The crowd in the gallery leaned in, eyes wide, not because of theatrics but because they knew they were watching a rare moment, power being stripped bare in real time. Trump slammed his palm on the table, the sound sharp, a performance of authority. "This is a witch hunt," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of its own fury. The words, once a rallying cry, felt tired now, worn thin by repetition. Denzel didn't flinch. He allowed the echo of Trump's outburst to fade before answering, his voice low but resonant. "A witch hunt," he repeated. "Tell that to the mothers who buried their children because hate was stirred like firewood. Tell that to the workers threatened in their own neighborhoods after your words lit the match." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, not because the idea was shocking but because it was said aloud, without hesitation. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment from every angle. Trump leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his fists clenched on the table, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. For the first time, he wasn't dictating the script. Denzel paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He scanned the room, meeting the eyes of jurors, journalists, even the judge. "Accountability isn't an attack," he said firmly. "It's justice." That single word rang like a bell through the chamber, impossible to ignore. The judge shifted slightly in his chair, as though even he felt the gravity pressing down on the room. Reporters scrambled to type every syllable, their fingers clattering on keyboards, desperate to keep pace with history as it unfolded. Trump's shoulders hunched, his bluster shrinking into muttered protests only his lawyers could hear. The audience sensed the shift, the once commanding figure looked cornered, not by legal arguments alone but by the sheer force of truth spoken plainly. Denzel leaned forward, his tone unshakable, his cadence steady like a drumbeat. "This courtroom doesn't belong to you, Donald. It belongs to the people. And the people have had enough." The sentence cracked through the silence like a whip, drawing audible murmurs from the gallery. Trump's hand rose, trembling slightly, as though to object, but no words came. His silence was louder than any shout he had ever unleashed at a rally. The camera zoomed in, capturing his faltering expression, while Denzel's calm, unwavering gaze became the defining image of the confrontation. In that instant, the courtroom ceased to be just a legal arena. It became a stage where America's divisions collided, raw and unfiltered. Denzel didn't smile, didn't gloat, he simply let the weight of the moment settle. His voice dropped into a near whisper, but every ear strained to hear, "The truth doesn't need volume to be heard." The line landed like a final blow, not shouted but delivered with surgical precision. And as the judge banged his gavel to restore order, everyone knew the gavel wasn't silencing Denzel, it was sealing his words into history. The air in the courtroom felt electric, as though the walls themselves carried the vibrations of tension. Every camera lens locked on Trump, his jaw tight, his face flushed with defiance masking unease. Denzel, standing firmly across from him, didn't rush his words, he let the silence stretch just long enough to make every ear lean in. "You built your empire on fear," he said, his voice deliberate, echoing like a verdict itself. "But fear collapses when people stop believing in it." A ripple moved through the gallery, some gasps, some nods of agreement, others scribbling furiously into notepads. Trump slammed his hand on the table, trying to project strength, but the sound rang hollow against Denzel's calm command of the room. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, not intervening, as if captivated by the exchange. Denzel took a single step closer, not aggressive but steady, embodying conviction. His words cut sharper than any lawyer's cross-examination. This isn't about politics. It's about accountability. And accountability has finally caught up to you. For the first time, Trump's eyes shifted, not toward the cameras, not toward the crowd, but downward, avoiding the stare that held him. The silence that followed was deafening, a silence heavy with realization that the shield of bluster and bravado had cracked. The audience rose, not in chaos but in stunned recognition of what they had witnessed. It wasn't just a clash of men, it was the collapse of a facade. And in that silence, Denzel's presence became not just an actor's role, but a symbol of unyielding truth standing unshaken against power. Flashes from the press cameras lit up the chamber like lightning, each burst capturing a historic confrontation in real time. Trump leaned forward, his fists clenched, his voice rising into a familiar tirade of denial and deflection. But the louder he grew, the calmer Denzel became, like a storm meeting a mountain. When Trump spat, "This is a witch hunt," the words echoed with desperation rather than power. Denzel paused, scanning the faces in the room, from the anxious jurors to the restless reporters. Then, with surgical precision, he delivered the line that froze the air: "If the truth feels like a witch hunt, maybe you've been casting the spells all along." The audience erupted, some clapping, some gasping, some stunned into silence. Trump's face turned crimson, and for the first time, the man who thrived on dominating every room looked cornered, his usual arsenal of comebacks failing him. The judge banged the gavel, demanding order, but the energy was already unleashed. Denzel didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Instead, he stood rooted in quiet authority, letting the weight of his words settle over everyone. The cameras caught it all, Trump shrinking beneath the glare of truth, Denzel immovable, unflinching, like the embodiment of justice itself. Outside, protesters' chants echoed through the streets, amplifying the courtroom drama into a national spectacle. This wasn't just another headline, it was a moment etched into history, the kind of clash that people would replay for years, asking themselves how one man's calm dismantled another's empire of noise. The gavel slammed again, but the tension refused to die. Trump, pacing like a caged animal, jabbed his finger toward Denzel, his words spilling in frantic waves: "You don't know what it takes to lead this country. You don't understand power." His voice cracked, desperation betraying the image of strength he so carefully tried to maintain. Denzel, still seated, leaned slightly forward, his tone low yet thunderous in its impact: "Leadership isn't about fear, it's about service. And power without integrity isn't power at all, it's cowardice." A murmur swept across the gallery. Even the stenographer paused for a second, realizing she was typing words that would echo far beyond this courtroom. Trump's face contorted, rage wrestling with disbelief, but he couldn't hide the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every bead of sweat on his forehead, every tremor in his clenched jaw. Denzel didn't relent. His calm gaze locked on Trump, holding him in place as if the entire courtroom had shrunk to just the two of them. "You built walls to keep people out," Denzel continued, voice steady, "but truth has a way of tearing them down." The room went silent. Trump froze, his bravado slipping like a mask coming loose. For once, there was no applause line, no crowd to roar in his defense, just the raw, inescapable sound of his opponent's words cutting through the noise. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, already drafting headlines that would ignite across every screen in America. The silence in the courtroom felt electric, like the charged pause before a storm breaks. Trump opened his mouth, searching for words that might restore his dominance, but nothing came. He tugged at his collar, glanced toward his lawyers, and even they seemed paralyzed by the force of the moment. The cameras lingered on his face, magnifying every flicker of panic for the world to see. Denzel rose slowly from his chair, and the room seemed to rise with him, as though the ground itself acknowledged his presence. His voice carried a solemn weight, stripped of theatrics, aimed directly at Trump but meant for the entire nation. History doesn't remember the excuses of the powerful, it remembers the courage of those who told the truth. Gasps rippled through the chamber, some nodding in silent agreement, others stunned by the audacity of his words. Trump slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp but hollow, like a drum with no echo. The judge's gavel came down again, but it barely registered. All eyes were locked on Denzel. For a fleeting moment, it felt less like a trial and more like a reckoning, as if centuries of unspoken grievances had converged into one showdown between noise and clarity. The press gallery erupted into a frenzy, phones flashing, pens scribbling, every outlet already crafting its narrative. Yet none of it could outshine the reality that played out live, Trump shrinking beneath the weight of truth, and Denzel standing tall, not just as an actor, but as the embodiment of resistance. As the final gavel struck, the courtroom no longer felt like a place of law but a stage where truth had taken center spotlight. Trump slumped back in his chair, his once commanding posture reduced to a silhouette of defeat, while the murmurs around him grew into waves of disbelief and vindication. Denzel, still standing, did not revel in triumph. His calm expression carried something deeper, a recognition that this battle was larger than two men. "This isn't about me or you," he said, his tone steady but piercing. "It's about every American who refuses to bow to lies. Justice belongs to them." The words seemed to etch themselves into the air, lingering even as silence returned. The crowd outside, watching on giant screens, erupted into chants that shook the very steps of the courthouse. News anchors scrambled to frame the moment, some calling it a political earthquake, others hailing it as a cultural turning point. Trump's defenders shouted about witch hunts, but their voices were drowned beneath the roar of a public that had seen too much to be fooled again. Denzel gathered his papers, bowed his head slightly, and walked out, not with the swagger of victory, but with the dignity of someone who had carried a nation's burden into battle and left it stronger. Cameras chased him, but what mattered was already written. History would mark this day not for Trump's collapse, but for the courage of one man who dared to corner him with nothing but words. And long after the trial faded into headlines, the echo remained, a reminder that truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced. History won't remember the noise, it will remember the courage. What we witnessed today wasn't just a clash of egos, it was a clash between lies and truth. And no matter how loud deception screams, truth always stands taller. This isn't the end of a story, it's the beginning of an awakening. Stay awake, stay loud, and never forget, justice belongs to the people.